Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Graham Cousins. I work in corporate technology at Thomson Reuters. I'm the CTO responsible for enterprise shared platforms. As many of you may know, we have a number of businesses at Thomson Reuters. We have our finance and risk businesses, we have legal businesses, tax and accounting, news agency, and the global growth organization. So my role really is to leverage technology and content across those businesses in an attempt to achieve scale and drive innovation. So today what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the content strategy at Thomson Reuters and where connected and linked data fit with that. My colleague down here, the good-looking guy, Edin, will then bring to life some of the excitement and opportunities that is creating with some of our key customers. We also, I've noticed, have a number of Thomson Reuters colleagues in the audience, and they unknowingly and unwittingly will be on hand to answer any tough questions that you may have, because indeed they're the experts. I'm just the voice and the voice of support. So I hope this pitch is right. I hope some of it resonates with you and kind of aligns with some of the journey and challenges that you have. Okay. So motherhood and apple pie, I guess we all face the same challenges, right, around velocity, variety, and volume of data. Multiple sources acquired over many years in different formats and stored in different persistence mechanisms, databases, and so forth. So TR does this at scale. We pride ourselves on the depth and breadth of our content and the richness of it. We cover public content, private content, third-party content. We cover social media, authored content, data at rest, low latency data. So we've just thrown up there a few stats that kind of give you an idea of the order of magnitude of the challenge that we face, but I'm sure that many of you in the audience face similar challenge and have equally impressive statistics. So of course, for many of us, this phenomenon and the history of mergers and acquisitions in the case of Thomson Reuters has led to some pretty hairy and complex legacy architecture. In many cases, the data is locked in silos. It's difficult to extract. It's difficult to append and amend with other data elements as our content sets grow. Perhaps more importantly, understanding how this data connects and the insights it can bring remain opaque. So until recently, we managed this data as best we could, but often at the cost of bandwidth and expertise best used elsewhere. So some of that probably sounds familiar. Ultimately, though, this is not a sustainable model, and the tech debt continues to stack up, as does the information blindness. But ultimately, we're all trying to get to pretty much the same place, right? So the business is demanding that we innovate with our content, that we reduce the total cost of ownership of our content, and that we improve our content agility and content propositions and time to market as we go forward. I mean, these are all reasonable and live business demands, and the sins of the past can't really be held up as excuses or obstacles to achieving those. Moreover, I think the business right now is more focused than ever on extracting greater value from its aggregated content sets and data sets. In short, it believes the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so enter big data, and with it the promise of unlocking hidden value from our vast corpus of content and data. Well, sort of, it helps. TR have indeed built a big data platform. We've done this with Hadoop, the classic stuff, HDFS, HBase, Spark, CDAP, and so forth. We've also started to embrace what the cloud can offer in terms of big data solutions as we move more of our content and our tooling to AWS and Azure in particular. The platform we have now on-prem, it does ingest, catalog, transform data, mines it, and then distributes enriched content to product. We've certainly had our teething problems here, and we can share some of those war stories offline. But I hasten to add that the tech and the tools are really only part of the answer. Great tools and scale can certainly solve some problems through brute force and clever data scientists, but it's not really the full story. Excuse me one second. So we realized pretty early on that our ability to leverage content insights lay as much in a well-defined information strategy as it did in the power of big data technologies. What we'll step through fairly quickly is a broad framework for how we went after an information model and where connected linked data fits with that. It starts really with the notion of content asset identity, then how you map and link those identities, integrate with other sources, and then begin to analyze to gain insight. So, even data scientists hate data wrangling, right? I don't think that's any big secret, and then tend to seek out data lakes where the water is nice and warm and clear rather than murky data swamps. So we knew we had to do something and bring some level of clarity to our content and data collections before it could be mined for insight. So at TR, what we did was we embarked on really a business-driven initiative around our content. And we did this in collaboration with product management and content operations. In very simple terms, we created a consistent data model and representation of all our key content sets. We joined those content sets using unique identifiers linked to our major pivot sets like organizations, people, deals, and so forth. The result was an information architecture and a linked data model that could support a richer transformation and a better mining experience. And it was this, really, this insight that gave the promise of big data that extra impetus it needed to unlock the value in content. So let's drill down a level. I was pleased to hear Perm ID mentioned in the last talk. But if we go down a level, we started out by creating a unique identifier, which we call the Perm ID, for all of our key entities. As I say, people, orgs, deals, legal cases, and so forth, right? All our content is, in some way, connected via either orgs, people, deals, cases, and other major pivot entities. And so by tagging each content set with one or more Perm IDs, we create links and hops across all our content sets, essentially building a web or a graph of our content and our data. This set of Perm IDs is also available to the wider data community, including our customers and partners, and we've exposed it on a website called openpermid.org. What's also interesting is we've exposed some of the tooling that allows you to extract Perm IDs and connect Perm IDs with your content also. And this is where it starts to get interesting, in that we've created and partnered on tooling that automatically analyzes content and extracts key entities and maps associated Perm IDs. We use this tooling internally, but make it available to our partners and customers so they can tag and extract metadata from their content sets using exactly the same identifiers as Thomson Reuters does. A logical outcome of this is a linked, connected ecosystem predicated on the Perm ID of content that transcends TR, but allows customers to connect to TR and to each other, of course, to augment their information with related content, such as bringing news to life or research to life for particular entities. So looking at some of the tools in turn, we start with TRIT. Thomson Reuters Intelligent Tagging. This is the tool that we use for mining unstructured text. It uses machine learning techniques to analyze documents and extract key entities. For each of these entities, it also assigns the associated Perm ID. It can also classify and categorize documents against taxonomies and topic codes, which also have Perm IDs. The result is a set of triples that tie the subject document to the key target entities, like people and organizations. In this way, we can link people of interest and companies of interest, for example, to news stories, research reports, patents, and much more. So essentially what we're doing is creating a mapping of unstructured content to structured data. Again, we make this tool available to our partners and customers, as well as the wider ecosystem, as well as using it internally at TR. So we have other tools and partners that comprise a suite for discovering and creating other linked data triples, and this list is not exhaustive by any means. We have just discussed TRIP for analyzing documents, but in the middle there, we also have Tamer, and we have another tool called Concord that can be used to map structured data, such as a relational database row, for example, to a Perm ID. This is useful ultimately for turning Oracle tables into triples. Atlas, on the other hand, at the bottom, allows us to mine a corpus of documents to discover relationships between entities in that multi-document set. So, for example, it can deduce supply chain relationships between organizations. It can discover affiliations between officers and directors of various companies, and so forth. I mean, the tools on the face of it appear to be a little bit like black magic, but they're merely algorithms that are optimized for certain domains and document types. But using machine learning techniques, they can be trained on new domains and document sets. And we now have a do-it-yourself capability that allows non-tech users to do that training for themselves. And in the fullness of time, we'll be exposing that to our customers and partners. So each tool essentially outputs a set of triples that creates a predicate between a subject and object, obviously, and we uniquely identify each, as well as the nature of the relationship between them. So we can connect these triples by snapping together identical Perm IDs, so the orgs, the people, the legal cases, and so forth. The logical outcome of this, of course, is a graph that is essentially a connected web of content that shows how content is linked, and it allows us to harvest explicit relationships, implicit relationships, and deeper derived relationships. So this allows determinations such as comparables analysis based on entity or data fingerprints, useful in investment banking, for example, for due diligence on like companies. We can do cause and effect analysis like you would see in supply chain or value chain. We do 360-degree view of entities like a deal, and we do a lot more. In fact, the legal business, as well as the financial domain, are now really starting to take advantage of the graph for areas like business development, business generation, lead generation, and there's an awful lot of work going on now around litigation analytics. So we are now starting to provide slices of these graphs as feeds to customers as part of the TR Bold initiative, Big Open Linked Data. And my colleague Edin here will speak to that in more depth shortly. So it's these interconnected triples that form what we refer to as the TR knowledge graph, which we now provide as direct feeds or as product marts. We store and persist the TR knowledge graph as RDF triples in a store we refer to as CMWell, which is our linked data grid. This is built primarily on Cassandra and Elastic, and the application, the tool that we've built, we have further open sourced in the last few months. We maintain a fully normalized view of the graph, which we call the authoritative graph, but we've also created materialized views, so if you like, summary denormalized views of the graph for particular consumption patterns to improve accessibility and performance at runtime. We provide APIs into the graph, and it also supports Sparkle queries, obviously. There's an ontology that describes the authoritative graph and the materialized views, and the ontology are supplied with the actual graph feed to help with further mapping and stitching customer content. So just closing the loop on the big data reference earlier. So we've built this pipeline on the Hadoop stack, essentially, on-prem, that ingests, transforms, tags, links, and distributes TR and third-party content at scale. The workflow contains cartridges that allow us to drop in machine learning tools like TRIP, Concord, Atlas, and others to generate the RDF triples we discussed earlier. These are then loaded into CMWell, our graph store, before onwards distribution to the TR graph feed. So my colleague, Edin, who works at the financial and business end of these tools, will now explain the commercial context and what we're doing with some of our customers. Edin.
I'll use this. Can everyone hear me okay? Because I don't have the mic. Thank you.
Yeah.
So given the pivot to open platform as a business globally, we started to talk to our customers about all the transformations we're doing to prepare ourselves to become such a business, and essentially start talking about ways that we're looking to better organize, link, and make that data available to the customers. And it's all the great work that Graham and his team have done so far in terms of the knowledge graph. One of the great things that our customers really caught on to is the triple store that we created in-house, which is the knowledge graph that Graham just mentioned. And most of them actually just said, you know what, let me just get access to your triple store. How do I do that? How can I get there? So that was the reason why we created our first knowledge graph feed of core entities that we store inside of in-house as a triple store, and we believe is kind of the largest and most precise graph database based on the foundational ontology model of Perm ID. And it's about 2 billion triples, and it continues to grow. We continue to add content sets to it over time. So we feel this is a very exciting era for TR in terms of the way that our clients are going to continue to access the data. I guess then we took a step back and we looked at everything else that we have within the firm, and we realized that we have a really big legacy of unstructured content. So we are primarily, as you know, a legacy Reuters news agency, and we've added things over time in terms of transcripts and corporate filings. So all of these are very strong textual data assets of ours that we have. And then on top of that, we added textual analytics, things like news sentiment, and metadata tagging services that Graham mentioned earlier. And then we said, well, we believe we can do great things when we look at how do we help our customers manage the unstructured content side of the equation, as well as link it to a linked data model informing the knowledge graph. And then we started to iterate with customers on prototypes and what are the interesting use cases they can do with these. And some of these I'll just mention very quickly are things like intelligent text recommendations that we're working with buy-side and sell-side firms around research and relationship managers. So make me aware of all the unknown relationships that exist in the ecosystem around the companies that I care about or people. So this is about entity extraction and much more than that in terms of then asking the graph around the relationship ecosystem around that entity. And then getting text recommendations around just help me mine that unstructured content through the graph help as well. And then how are for example, industries and countries connected, right? It's just humanly impossible to grasp all the different ways that the world is interconnected. And in this sense, for research, it's very important to understand, for example, industry exposures to countries and suppliers and so on and so forth. And then finally, what the project that I'm most excited about is how do I just ask a natural language query to a graph and give me an answer? Because for me in the beginning, it was a lot of education over time in terms of, well, what does a graph mean? How can you use it? How do I get the most out of it? And I believe that this is one of the ways that we're going to really make the connection to all our users in terms of how do I just ask a simple question and get an answer right back that is a graph type question. So finally, in terms of what we're making available, just to make it clear, the knowledge graph feed is a key part of our Bold Solution stack. As I mentioned, we have unstructured content that we make available, so transcripts, filings, and research and news. We are able to run that through a metadata tagging system, which is now optimized for news and research in terms of the metadata comes out. And then we bring it into a big data platform stack called the Data Fusion, which essentially just allows our customers to accelerate their big data projects instead of building the ETL tools kind of ground up. It has a lot of the pre-optimized big data packages inside of it. So that's, in a nutshell, that's Bold Solutions. We're around at the booth for any questions. So thank you for your time.
Got time for some audience questions. Any questions on this side of the room? One over there, one up here.
So, are your customers happy with just part of the graph, or are they typically want to consume the entire thing? So, are you doing any sub-slicing, and is that what they want? or they just want, give me everything?
I mean, I guess from an initial release of the knowledge graph feed perspective, we are making just a sub-slice of the overall graph. There's a lot more relationships that are available in-house. But we're making sure, of course, when you start externalizing something you have internally, you want to make sure your kind of data model is fully locked down, bedded down. So you start at a smaller scale and making sure that what you're making available is fully kind of 100% vetted. And Graham and his team are very helpful with that, and making sure that everything that we pose to customers is already pre-modeled, and you don't have to do a lot of transformations yourselves. And then we'll continue to grow the graph. So for example, we're ingesting deals and M&A activity in Q1 of next year. We'll continue to grow the graph over time.
Yeah, I think what we've exposed, or what we're trying to expose commercially, is more in the financial services space, right? So that is part of the graph. There's another area of the graph around organizations, supply chain, hierarchies, and so forth, that other types of companies, including spooky three-letter agencies in the States, are interested in. And then there's another big part of the graph that we've not exposed externally at the moment, which has got a lot of the kind of legal and tax information in it, particularly about judges and courts and so forth. So we're building products internally on the back of that graph. But at some point, the intent is that the legal business will go into more of an open platform space and start exposing that RDF as a graph as well to their customers. But it's new territory for that part of the business.
It looks like you're throwing some nice technology at the problem. To what degree have you had to put in governance structures within the business to try to tame data quality issues or any other data problems which technology in themselves couldn't naturally solve?
It's a good question. I'll take a run at that. So for a number of years, we've been working on something that internally we call Content Marketplace, where we've tried to get a kind of consistent canonical model and linked model of all our content. I think somebody earlier mentioned it, kind of drifted into the notion of connected and linked data without even realizing it. We were doing it with Oracle and XML packets and so forth. But the discipline around establishing what our pivot sets were, what our views were, what our key content sets were, was great in terms of setting the baseline for an information architecture that we've been able to build on with what we now think of as linked data and connected data tools. Just that they weren't available to us at the time. Maybe they were, Bob. Thickies like me just didn't know it. But it's a key problem. And we do, in all honesty, we do still find data issues where things are not concorded properly, or we've got reconciliation issues across data sets. Mergers and acquisitions have been one of the best things we've done and one of the worst things we've done in terms of the data.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I just have a question. If I can see that country and company have been picked up from linked open data cloud, so are you in the graph feed? Do you enrich back to the linked open data cloud? So if I was a customer and I took the graph feed, could I potentially look up that company with another data set that uses that company and use your data and another service's data?
As long as that data set is mapped to our Perm IDs, for which we have matching and concordance tools, yes.
So does Perm ID link back to any linked open data set? Or is it considered a single authoritative source?
Well, we're working through linking it. I don't know if we...
Well, I can tell you what we do. I'm not sure that I fully understand the question, but that's me rather than you probably. One of our pivot sets that we master is organizations, right? Org authority. So we've got a very big org authority, and we spend millions a year mastering it. And we're ingesting content from Dun & Bradstreet, Sinotrust, all kinds of people, right? And then from our own kind of activities around deals, M&A and so forth, we're adding on to that and concording. So we really regard our organization authority and the legal entity hierarchy within it as our master, as our predicate. So we're not reaching out to other sources to pull them in at runtime. it is our Bible of organizations, public and private. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Why Azure as opposed to AWS?
No, well, I kind of misspoke, right? And probably I should have said every cloud I could think of just to keep everybody happy. Our primary focus is AWS, but we recognize that a lot of our customers live in Microsoft, and so there are things we're doing with Azure as well. And I think we're doing POCs with Google Cloud, right? So we're certainly not being prejudiced, but our cloud of choice for development is AWS.
How much in your thinking, when you're looking at tools within that space, do you say, right, I'm going to go with the open source alternative as opposed to, and I'm thinking of things like Kafka as opposed to Kinesis or things like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's some thinking around that. So the edict is that we shouldn't be building anything, right, internally. So most of the CTOs we go with the AWS tooling, and I know there's a certain amount of lock-in with that, or we go with open source. And I think it's going to be a combination of the two. It's going to be the best tool for the job. I've not played around with Kinesis too much. We've used Kafka a lot with our on-prem solutions for Hadoop. It's okay, has its limitations when it comes to latency and scale.
Could you give us a bit more detail on what a client would do? So if, let's say you've got a client there, they've got organizations, they've got deals and stuff like that. You would make a part of your graph, a slice of your graph available. Then how do you link your own client data to your data, basically, to get the benefit from that graph?
Yeah, so we have concordance tools and matching tools to match whatever you have within the firm to our Perm IDs that actually then map up to our organizational authority. So we have tooling systems that allow you to concord your data to our data. Now, obviously, we can't promise that we'll cover the world, right? You might have an esoteric instrument that we don't cover in our, but we will do our best, and we have data engineers and data scientists that kind of help work through that process together with the customer around, well, how do I model something that's not modeled in your data sets? So.
Yeah, we also have this notion of a sort of symbology mapping, which we are going to implement as a graph and as a graph feed. So if people are taking data feeds from our RDF data feeds, if you've got different identifiers across different domains, in theory, the symbology is the kind of spider's glue that pulls them, knits them together. And so getting the scope of that right is going to be the challenge.
So how do you protect and license your data to your customers?
With considerable effort and expense, actually. So we do rights and entitlements on all our content, right? It starts off, most of it starts off in relational stores, mastered in relational stores, and we propagate the rights across the rights and obligations across the content. And then at runtime, when somebody requests the data, we actually have a look at what licenses they have paid for, and we have a permissions generator, and it matches the licenses with the obligations that have been propagated across the data, and it only releases what people are entitled for. Now, I've kind of cheated a little bit on that question, because for most of the content we are releasing right now, it's all ours and there's no third party or royalty obligations. But as we broaden the graph out, that's going to be a big deal, and it's going to compound what's already a very big, very complex normalized graph even further.
So you have derivation licenses as
well? God, don't get me started. Yeah, it's when it goes through 10 calculations, so we've got to tie it with provenance as well, and so some of those rules and combinations and permutations are unfathomable. So as a rule, we don't release anything that we're not clear about, that we're absolutely entitled to release that's third party without being able to issue the royalty.
If I already have a license to data store, if I already have a license the data scope? Is it linked somehow? If I have all data scope data, can I get access to the Perm IDs too? So I can use the advantage of them and link them together on my side?
It's a good question. You might be a better place to
Yeah.
actually. If now's your business, I'm going to cop out.
Well, let's take that offline. I think that's a specific case because you already have access to, so we could talk about that individually. But I mean, yeah, I mean, we try to make it. In my business strategy, I'm looking at it as if you're already paying for a certain type of content today, and I would like to make it available through the graph. I wouldn't necessarily want to charge, double and triple.
You talked about open sourcing part of the stack. Could you talk about which parts are being open sourced and where to find them?
Yeah, so we built this thing called CMWell, which is kind of the linked data grid, which is where we store all the triples, essentially store the TR graph. So it's kind of the whole graph, the authoritative view, and then the materialized view. So the subsets that we're actually releasing as part of the graph feeds or that create product data marts. So that, in any case, was built on open source technologies, Cassandra and Elastic. And then there's some kind of secrets. Well, it's not secret anymore. There's some source around that glues it all together. But we've open sourced all of that. We felt that there were some features around scale, around search, around other things that we couldn't quite get with other graph databases we wanted. So part of the reason we open sourced it was because A, we're good corporate citizens, of course, but B, because we wanted to put pressure on some of the other vendors to get parity with what we think we've built that are in terms of differentiation.
And beside that, I mean, just so everyone's aware, there is a community edition of our Data Fusion platform, and there is Open Calais tools that are referring to our open source natural language processing, so you can kind of get a feel for what the metadata extraction looks like in the platform as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Really interesting presentation.